so you were one of the members of the guild who got to attend the British Columbia Craft Brewers Guild. And you sent a really interesting note of one of your takeaways, which is about label approval and traceability. And that really kind of got me curious about what that was and what you learned. So could you just give us a little bit of background about what your takeaways on this were?
Sure. So the traceability and the labeling bits all come from kind of a larger initiative, which is Safe Food for Canadians. And this applies to food and beverage of all types. And the traceability comes from a desire to understand where food ends up so that if there's a recall, those ingredients can be traced throughout the process of production. So in the case of brewing, it's if there's a yeast recall, for example, then that information of where it came from can be easily tracked, and then the items can be found in the market and then taken care of. And there's a labeling component to that as well, because the safe food requirements involve a lot more disclosure of ingredients. And so that involves things like having contained statements and having, all of the different allergens and things of that sort all listed. So it's definitely a pretty involved process, that, and because it's federal, also obviously in French too. So, it was definitely interesting to see all of these different, how they all kind of fall in line with a common health policy, and how they all kind of manifested down to every level of from packaging to your ideation of how you approach production potentially too.
Yeah, this is probably an imperfect example, but the way that you're talking about it reminds me of this ongoing conversation with US brewers about the threat of exploding cans, which
Mm-hmm.
comes from the ingredients and the re-fermentation that can take place after
Mm-hmm.
packaging, the way that breweries try to put warnings on labels, to label both the ingredient and the process. And so it sounds like the things that you were hearing is there are both practical sides for what producers have to pay attention to, but also this is a safety and just information educational side for consumers as well. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, there's a lot of concern for what people are eating, and because drinking is much like eating, there's a lot of disclosure that needs to occur, as is a view of the Canadian government of what you're putting in your body. So that involves, if it's beer, there's actually a definition for what beer is, and that has to involve the biotransformation of malt and hops as well, which is a little different from how the TTB views beer in America. So yeah, getting a comparative view was definitely really, really interesting. And yeah, I couldn't stop thinking about issues like the exploding cans or the misstatements of alcohol and things like that. Specifically to the point of exploding cans, one of the items mentioned in the labeling requirements is that there's a maximum percentage of residual sugars can be 4%. And that's simple sugars. So that's simple sugars, which include lactose and other things. So for these things that are like heavily pureed or have a lot of lactose, there could be issues if you're trying to do those same things in Canada. I guess at the same time, it's not to say that these things couldn't happen as a result of traceability. There's always potential for things to be mislabeled or for things to happen, but it's good to see that the consumers are being taken into consideration.
When you were reflecting after the conference, you had mentioned to me that this particular conversation about label approval and traceability led to conversations with friends outside of the US and Canada to talk more about it. What were some of those conversations? What were you curious about to follow up on?
Yeah, so the first people I kind of thought to talk with were people that live in other Western countries that have a lot of regulation around alcohol. So I immediately kind of spoke with some friends in Denmark and in Sweden that I kind of thought would have similar processes to the traceability in Canada. Um, and I was kind of surprised to find that what exists for non-organic beer in Denmark and Sweden is actually a little more like what we have here, as far as you basically need to have proof of what you brought in and what you sent out. And so it was kind of interesting. My expectations weren't really met. And so that then led to discussions with brewers here and to other kind of industry folks. So it definitely left me with more questions than I had going into it.
Well, I love the fact that even if you have more questions, there's just kind of general reporting taking place here, that you're just reaching out to learn more, which is really great. And also leads to, I guess, the broader question of, based on what you learned maybe at the conference, what you're learning from these conversations that you're having, about why you think these things are important for other writers and podcasters to think about in terms of their own storytelling.
Yeah, ultimately, I think that having a broader sort of idea as to what's happening in the world of beer and looking at things comparatively is always going to bring ideas to you in some way. And so I think that for people that are reporting or that are just interested in beer and want to write stories, you do want to look at even a small thing like the British Canadian beer scene is rather small, but but there's a lot that's happening there that's influenced by legislation, and so there's a lot that you can talk about just from that little bit alone. And you can, if you have trouble kind of imagining that, you can think about it in comparison to what you see around you immediately, and then that can give you a lot of ideas as well.